Here I am to introduce Monica Mehta. She is a sought-after small business and a finance expert with 15 years of hands-on experience as an investor, operator of multi-million-dollar consumer businesses, and advisor to hundreds of entrepreneurs. She is currently working as a managing principal at the 7th Capital in New York City. It's an investment firm. She has also written many columns for Inc. magazine, Bloomberg Business. She's also appeared on Real Time Bill Maher, we just saw that, The O'Reilly Factor, Fox and Friends, Fox Business, MSNBC, Bloomberg TV, and ABC News. I think I can just go on and on because she has done so much. Monica has also written a book, and I would certainly like to read this book for sure because I'm an entrepreneur. Her first book, The Entrepreneurial Instinct, explores the connection between behavior, brain science, and entrepreneurial success. The book was awarded the Best Startup Book of 2012 by Small Business Trends, a finalist for the Best Book of 2012 in Business and Economics by Forward Reviews, and the Best Book of 2012 by the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the largest association of small business owners in the US, people like me. She is a graduate of the Wharton School of Business, and this is her favorite quote, and I also love it. I would definitely abide by it. Follow your bliss and don't be afraid. Doors will appear where there once were walls. If you follow your bliss, doors will open for you that wouldn't have opened for anyone else. As we all know, risk brings results, and that's what Monica is going to talk to us about. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak here today. At first, when I got this invitation, I wasn't sure what I could share with a group of doctors, but as I didn't realize before, so many of you are entrepreneurs. Looking at the statistics, I think just looking back in 2004, 70% of physicians actually worked in private practice. And I think as a group of entrepreneurs, you're facing a lot more adversity and risk than many other categories of business owners. The number of physicians practicing in private practice is going down. It's now gone from 70% to 50%. And while most of your training in university, and frankly, if many of you went to go get an MBA, those skills teach you how to be a good manager. It doesn't necessarily translate into being a successful entrepreneur. And so I'm here to talk to you about a very different skill set, a skill set that most people really don't learn how to tap into, and that's really learning how to leverage your innate strengths and learning how to look adversity in the face and rise, not shrink. So I wanted to start off this talk by telling you a little bit about two entrepreneurs, Rita and Sunil. Sunil was a merchant marine ship's captain, and Rita was an artist, and they and their family lived at sea. And Sunil was a merchant marine ship's captain for about 16 years until his children got to the age where they had to go to school. So they couldn't live on the ship anymore. So Sunil took a third of his life savings and decided to buy up a container full of Indian handicrafts. And he moved his family to America, where they really didn't know anyone. He had a sister in Georgia who said, you know, America's the land of opportunity, why don't you come over here? And so he did. And so they moved here not knowing a soul, and Sunil with his handicrafts basically went door to door to every furniture store to see if anyone would buy his handicrafts. And the way you guys are looking at me is how most people were looking at him. they were just boggled by it. So he knocked on these doors for a month and no one would buy his wares. And so after a month, Rita told Sunil, hey, maybe you should think about getting a job because we need to start seeing some money come in. And so Sunil went out and looked for a job, but the only job he could find was as a surveyor of ships, which paid half of what he made as a ship's captain. And his dignity would not allow him to take such a step back. So he basically went back out there and started trying to sell his wares again. But again, another month passed, absolutely no luck. So he took this job that paid so much less than what he made before, but he never lost sight of the fact that he really wanted to be an entrepreneur and do more. And so in his off hours, he would drive around town and scout locations for where he could open a store. I mean, he had all this stuff. So when he went to meet with the landlords, even though he had some savings, no one would give him the time of day because he had no credit history. He was new to this country. And so, time passed and he never wavered from this desire to do something for himself. And it took about a year before he finally found someone who gave him a break and gave him a lease for a restaurant space, which he converted by hand himself into a gift shop. And within that first month of opening the store, they made more in sales than he made in a whole year as a ship surveyor. And sales were great for the first couple of months, and then they fell off a cliff. All of a sudden, nobody wanted these handicrafts, and it was because the Christmas season was over. And so Rita, who worked the register at the store, saw people walking around the mall carrying these bags of clothes, and she thought, we need to carry clothes. And so without any kind of plan, they booked a trip to New York and basically went to visit wholesalers and bought up some clothes for their store. And all of a sudden, the sales started picking up. And over the course of the next decade, they opened new stores every few months and just learned along the way as they were going along. And from the third store, they were located next to an accessory store, and they learned the accessory business just watching their neighbors. And when they had a lot of inventory that they needed to store, they started attending foreclosure auctions. And when Sneal was at the foreclosure auctions, he started buying up tracts of lands and warehouses. And over 30 years, this tiny little gift shop turned into a wholesaling business. They started making clothes for all of the stores that they had. They had dozens of stores at this point. And from a tiny gift shop, it turned into a wholesaling chain, which then led rise to a diversified investment company that owns office buildings, shopping centers, and housing developments. And they had no training to know that they could do this. And frankly, no one around them had any belief that they could do this. All they had was a belief in themselves and their capability. And the thing is, Rita and Sunil's story isn't so unusual. It's actually the real story of entrepreneurship. Most entrepreneurs don't write business plans. They don't chase venture capital, and they learn by doing. And they learn from their customers and keeping their eyes open. And it's really not just Rita and Sunil who became successful this way. They're multimillionaires today. But if you look at these guys, they found success also by following their instinct. And for example, you have Tom Moynihan, who was the founder of Domino's Pizza. He was a high school dropout. He bought a pizza outlet, and his only previous experience was as a soda jerk and a busboy. Howard Schultz, if he had done any kind of market research, he would have seen that coffee consumption was actually declining for 2 decades in the US when he bought the first Starbucks. Anita Roddick, who started The Body Shop, she started it without any kind of training or experience. She started it out of sheer necessity. Her husband left her. She had 2 kids that she had to take care of. And nobody really talks about entrepreneurship in these terms, but for her, it was survival. And Richard Branson, another high school dropout, he started one random business after the next. He had a business selling Christmas trees, and then he bought a magazine, and he started putting these ads for music at the back of his magazine, and all of a sudden, checks started coming in. This is the founder of Virgin. And Sam Walton bought a failing general store with just 18 months of retailing experience. It turns out the founder of Walmart did pretty okay for himself. So I know this story pretty well because Rita and Sunil are my parents, and watching them, I really didn't know what they were doing. It didn't follow conventional wisdom. And they didn't follow a path that anyone tells you to follow. I mean, you're supposed to be careful, you're supposed to write plans, but they just did and learned by doing. And you know, I adopted conventional wisdom. I was a good student, so I focused on getting straight A's. My goal was to get into the Ivy League, and my thought was, you know what, they had so many struggles because they were new here, but I'm gonna one-up them. And so I did that. I went to Wharton, I got the consulting and venture capital jobs all my peers were clawing to get, and all the while, I just wanted to be like them. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so during the day, I would have my type A job, and at night, I would work on my business plans, but I found that at the end of the day, even though I could write these great business plans, I couldn't take the risks that they could take with no training at all. And that's what really led me to start asking a lot of questions to understand what makes some people just good at taking risks. And there was a very interesting study that actually came out of Cambridge University, and they looked at entrepreneurs and corporate managers who have the same level of IQ and the same years of experience, and they gave them a battery of tests. They put fMRI scans to the brain, and they had behavioral studies, and what they found is if you give these groups of people questions, like here's some information, answer this like a smart person, they all answer the questions the same way. But when it comes to taking risks, so giving questions of upside gain or downside loss, the entrepreneurs overwhelmingly took riskier bets. And what they found is when these entrepreneurs are in the moments of taking risk or anticipating risk, there's actually a chemical release happening in the brain. They're experiencing a release of dopamine. It's the chemical that's essential for learning, for concentration, and for pleasure. And that release was actually not happening with the corporate managers. The other thing they found is that in behavioral studies, the entrepreneurs scored higher on tests of cognitive flexibility, in lay terms, adaptability. And what they found is, in a nutshell, what makes an entrepreneur different is the ability to take risks. It has nothing to do with your intelligence, it has nothing to do with where you went to school or your experience. It's the ability to take risks. And you can break that down even further. Risk-taking has an equation. It's a combination of impulsivity and adaptability. The impulsivity may sound really haphazard to you, but when it comes to business, it translates into a bias to action. You're not sitting there and thinking through every different possibility. Instead, the other guy's already 3 lights down the road on his path to success. So impulsivity when it comes to taking risks is essential because it's a bias to action. The other half of the equation is adaptability, because impulsivity by itself could lead you to do all sorts of crazy things. But it's that adaptability or that ability to make the best of whatever comes your way. When you have the two, it's a magic formula for risk-taking. And so some people are just born with fewer neuroreceptors in the reward pathway of the brain, and they can't help themselves. They're just wired to be this way. To take risks for those people just comes more easily. But for the rest of us, there's a lot that we can learn from the natural risk taker. The basic wiring of the brain is the same, regardless of who you are. And so, next slide, please. You have to think about your brain like a traffic light. There's a side of the brain that feels loss, and there's a side of the brain that feels reward. And for most of us, 85% of the population, your knee-jerk reaction is to focus on loss. When you face any kind of ambiguity, adversity, or failure, this is the side of the brain that lights up. Immediately, your natural inclination is to play 20 questions. Think about everything that could go wrong. But what you don't realize you're doing is you're more deeply ingraining yourself in loss aversion. You're making it almost impossible for yourself to take the risk. The other side of the brain, which is the side of the brain that feels reward, is where the dopamine, when it flows, it actually motivates you to take action. And so the key for the person who is not naturally inclined to take these risks is, number one, just know that loss aversion exists. It's something that inflicts all of us. And if you want to have any chance at taking risks for gain, you have to turn off the loss so you can turn on the gain. And so while these two sides of the brain are not connected, when one is on, the other is off. So when you want to take risks, you have to learn to focus on the reward, not focus on the loss. So next slide. And so I'm going to leave you with just a few tips on how you can do this for yourself. And they're fairly straightforward, everyday ways to do it. And the first tip is basically to know what motivates you. And that's different for all of us. It could be passion, it could be money, it could be altruism, it could be anger or spite. These are all very powerful motivators. But again, if you are focusing on something that motivates you, you're keeping the loss and the fear off. Second is take baby steps. We actually learn more from success than failure, and that dopamine release is, again, integral to this whole idea. And every time you fail, you feel a depletion of dopamine in the system. You feel a lack of motivation. So the best thing you can do for yourself is to take tiny baby steps with whatever it is you want to do. If you can set yourself up to feel repeated small successes, you're causing that constant release of dopamine, which can actually propel you to much greater success. And then finally, and this is easy, say yes to just about everything. Stop saying no. And it's because every time you say yes, you open a door to new opportunities. And implicit in the idea of saying yes is an optimism and a confidence that you're capable of taking this open door in front of you and making the best that comes from it. And additionally, your environment matters. Mind the company you keep. You spend a lot of time with people who are averse from taking risks, you're not going to take risks. There's a lot of other tips out there, and again, they're not rocket science, they're pretty easy, but they're fairly grounded in your physiology. And so while you're doctors, you're also entrepreneurs, and I hope to see all of you find great success.